everybody. My name is Gea. I'm the regional manager for Europe within ICA, and I'm joined by my colleague Cindy, part of our educational team. And we would like to welcome you today to the webinar, Proof Not Promises, What Europe's New Green Claim Rules Mean for Destinations, Venues, and Convention Bureaus. I will soon be handing it over to my colleague Steve, who will be doing the presentation. If you have any questions, please put them in the chat or save them at the end. So we will take some time there to answer your questions. So Steve, if you're all ready, over to you.
Thank you very much. Yeah, good morning, good afternoon, wherever you may be. Yeah, thanks for joining us. So my name's Steve Newman. I'm the Chief Sustainability Officer at EarthCheck, which is the world's leading certification advisory group for sustainable tourism organizations and destinations. Today, we're going to be looking at what Europe's green claims rules mean specifically for destinations, convention bureau venues, and event organizers. Now, there's quite a bit of terminology, so let me just say as a disclaimer from the beginning, although the Green Claims Directive has been walked back, the empowering consumers for the green transition remains, and that's quite a mouthful. So I'm mostly going to be talking about green claims, but I'll be referring to ECGT or MCO, as you may well know it. So let me just preface this by saying, look, my goal is not to turn you into lawyers. It's to help you communicate sustainability with greater confidence and lower risk. And hopefully by the end of this session, you will understand what has changed, why it matters, and the practical steps you can take immediately. So this session today will follow a logical journey, and we'll start with the regulatory changes taking effect this September before looking at where sustainability claims appear across the meetings ecosystem. We'll then discuss which claims create the greatest risk, how to strengthen evidence and governance, and finish with some practical actions you can take back to your organization. My focus throughout will be on relevant real-world examples, but I also encourage you to think about your own claims throughout this session. But before we crack on, I'd first like to have a poll to understand who is joining us today. So if you could take a few moments to answer the poll on your screen and on mine. And this will give us a good understanding of who's in the room, as it were. And just so we can see, the sort of weighting that we may have. Okay. So I can share that this is actually quite a good spread to see who we've got here joining us from across this the meetings ecosystem. It's very nice to see, and I'll try and bear this in mind. Now, out of everyone here, we have a second question to quickly ask you before we go. So now we know who you are and where you're coming from. The question now is, do you have a formal approval process for sustainability claims? Don't be shy. Okay. And we see that 71% of people have answered no. And this is, I'm actually surprised it is as high as 29% saying yes. Because for most of us, a formal approval process still isn't existing. And hopefully this therefore is going to set the context for what we're going to be talking about. Because for many of us, we make claims, and we are so used to saying things and telling our stories For many years, sustainability communication was about telling people what we're doing. But today the question has changed. Buyers, regulators, consumers increasingly want to know whether or not we can prove what we're saying, whether that's destination, event, or venue. And that shift from storytelling to substantiation sits at the heart of the Empowering Consumers Directive. It's driving changes well beyond Europe. So this directive introduces one simple principle. Environmental claims must be clear, specific, substantiated, and not misleading. And this applies to all of us, and it applies to everything that we say. So good sustainability stories are still important, but now we need to have the evidence that stands behind them. So I suppose let's start at the beginning, turn the clock back a little bit and just sort of answer the question, why did Europe decide an intervention was necessary in the first place? The starting point was a European Commission study in 2020 that found that more than half of 230 environmental claims assessed were vague, misleading, or unfounded, while 4 out of 10 had no supporting evidence whatsoever. At the same time, consumers were faced with hundreds of environmental labels, making it difficult to know which claims could be trusted. So Europe intervened with the goal to restore confidence and improve transparency and reward organizations that can generally demonstrate their performance. So ultimately, this is all about rebuilding consumer trust rather than discouraging sustainability communication. And we will touch on this concept of green hushing a little later. So let's start going from this then. What actually counts as a green claim? Now, many organizations assume a green claim is simply using the words sustainable or carbon neutral, but the definition is much broader. Images, colors, icons, badges, and overall design can all create an environmental impression. So we're talking explicit, the words that we use, and implicit, meaning the colors or imagery. Things like BP, British Petroleum, having green labels makes you think that their fuel is environmentally friendly, when it's quite far from that. So a destination website, for example, with a green leaf imagery or a venue brochure using sustainability icons, or an event promoted as responsible conference may all be making green claims. Now, the way that this is inferred is if a reasonable person could infer an environmental benefit, it is worth asking whether you have the evidence to support that impression. And once we've identified a claim, and all these different claims that might exist, there's a lot to consider here. The second step then, of course, is how should you and how can we assess whether or not the claim is credible? And I encourage organizations to use these 4 questions as a simple internal checklist. The stronger each test, the more credible the claim. Credible claims build trust, which drives choice. And increasingly, this is going to be a differentiator and something that will enable you to win business and attract customers. So first, is the claim clear enough for an ordinary person to understand? So this means avoiding jargon. It means communicates a very clear meaning, easy to understand for the layperson. Second, is it specific? Is it specific about what is being claimed, where it applies? In sort of ESG terminology here, we're talking about the scope and the boundary and the subject, but really keeping this simple is, if you're saying something is uses sustainable materials, have you defined which materials or where these have been used? Otherwise, a reasonable person would think that everything has used sustainable materials. Can the evidence be produced today if it is challenged? And this is a very key point, because often data can be quite hard to come by, and increasingly when you're asked to prove things, you need to have a clear audit trail. You need to be able to demonstrate it on request, and you need to have that credible and robust data to prove and to back up your claim should it be challenged. And finally, can it be independently verified where appropriate? So moving towards third party or independently verified statements increasingly is going to ensure that your claims are credible and protected. If any of your answers to any of these is no, then the claim probably needs refinement before you publish it. And the thing is these principles apply wherever the claims are communicated. So where your claims may appear across the ecosystem, across the meetings industry, they often appear far beyond your website. They can be found in destination marketing, they can bid proposals, venue brochures, sales proposals, social media, event websites, and post-event reports. And each and every one of these touch points contributes to the overall impression that buyers and delegates form about your organization. What this means is compliance is no longer solely a marketing issue. It requires coordination across the entire business because these claims are shared. It's important to consider who is actually responsible for these claims. Now, in reality, no single organization owns sustainability communication anymore. A destination may promote itself as sustainable. The Convention Bureau reinforces that message. The venue highlights its certification, and the organizer publishes an event impact report. Now, if any single part of that chain cannot substantiate its claims, then confidence in the entire event can be affected. So we're now in a situation where evidence becomes shared and consistent messaging is therefore going to become a more of a competitive advantage, not simply a compliance requirement. So again, and I'm going to repeat this a few times when we go through while we're talking about green claims, because your key take home is to remember this messaging in terms of be clear, using your specific language, be specific and consistent, align your messages across all of the touch points, be supportive, back every claim with evidence, and be verified. Wherever possible, use credible standards and independent verification. So this is quite obviously it's going to be a challenge for the entire industry because you not only have to scrutinize your own claims, but you'll also have to scrutinize the claims of those that you're doing business with. And you'll increasingly see in sort of ESG terminology that it's no longer just about your business, it's about the entire value chain. And so now it becomes about shared impact. And of course, if you then get all of this right and you work with your partners, so then it becomes about shared trust and credibility. One of the challenges here is that different audiences also expect different types of evidence. So the same sustainability statement may be interpreted quite differently depending on who is reading it. Delegates may want simple, understandable information. Corporate buyers may look for measurable evidence and comparable performance. Associations want alignment with their own sustainability commitments, and media organizations often focus on inconsistencies. Convention Bureau frequently sit at the center of all of these expectations, which makes governance and evidence particularly important. And the challenge here is that one well-supported claim can satisfy all of these audiences, providing the evidence is robust. I think at this juncture, it's very important to note that any person can challenge a green claim. So whether this is a National Consumer Protection Authority, competition authorities, courts, competitors, consumer organizations, advertising standard bodies, customers, B2B or B2C, investors, stakeholders, media, researchers, or even certification bodies and scheme owners. Any claim that you make can be challenged by any individual or organization, which is quite a scary thought. It means that everyone should assume that any claim made publicly may ultimately need to be defended. It will fall under scrutiny. Consider, for example, how well you trust or get on with your competitors, and what an advantage that would be for them to question claims that you are making. The Empowering Consumers for the Green Transition coming out in September. This is going to provide an avenue for formal complaints and formal challenges for every single thing that you say. So, as you mentioned, because this cuts across the entire chain, the industry needs to move from this idea of separate stories towards shared evidence. Now, historically, every organization developed its own sustainability story using different terminology, data sets, different standards. And this approach is what the EU are trying to tackle. This approach makes it very difficult for buyers to compare claims and for organizations to defend them consistently. So we're now moving towards a shared language, shared evidence, and a much clearer ownership of claims across the meeting ecosystem. Now, this doesn't necessarily sound exciting, especially to to marketing departments that are looking for the edge over their competitors, of course, because it sounds like we're trying to make every organization identical, but it's not about that. It's about ensuring the evidence behind claims is consistent and is traceable. The organizations that collaborate around evidence will be able to communicate far more confidently than those that work in isolation. Now, we're already seeing this transition happen, and I think one of the best examples at the moment is Booking.com, which has fundamentally changed how it communicates sustainability following regulatory scrutiny. So some of you may recall that Booking.com had a travel sustainable badge, which now has been removed from regulatory scrutiny, and it's now shifted towards third-party certification instead. So what's the issue here? Well, Booking.com, based in Amsterdam, therefore, Dutch regulators were concerned about the possibility of a misleading sustainability claim. The implication that traveling and staying at one of the program-affiliated accommodations was sustainable. And the use of a green leaf further reinforces this by implying that it is environmentally friendly. On top of this, the travel sustainability program didn't clearly state how it measured sustainability. So, for example, a hotel may have eliminated single-use plastic, and that may well be enough to get the badge when it could be producing a lot of carbon emissions or polluting or producing a lot of waste. So the outcome was the removal of the travel sustainable name and its levels, while Booking.com have chosen to keep the practices of individual hotels visible, with a shift to third-party certification and a filter so that consumers can find the badges and the labels that they trust, that they understand are verifiable. The lesson here is that platforms are becoming much more cautious about the claims they present to consumers. Certification still has an important role, but it has to be supported by credible governance and transparent evidence. Not all badges are equal, and many badges may have optional components that you don't have to do, that you do. And therefore even those are being scrutinized based on the data and how robust and transparent they are. So market expectations are already changing. We're talking about something that's going to happen in September, but there's already been actions that have been taken. So regardless of future legislation and what comes, the market is already adapting. And Booking.com are not the only organization that have fallen foul already. Now, so far, a lot of the attention has been around green claims, has been on the airline industry. And both KLM and Lufthansa both encountered problems for misleading claims in advertisements around climate friendliness. Lufthansa got into even more trouble when the EU declared they were misleading, but then they went and used them in Hong Kong and used them in another market, and there was backlash against this. So this trend is not just limited to Europe, and they're being scrutinized across many jurisdictions. And of course, equally, um, just like uh, data privacy, GDPR, a lot of EU regulations reach far beyond the borders and the boundaries of the European Union. In addition to those EU regulations, though, the UK, Canada, Australia, they've all strengthened expectations around environmental marketing. And regulators have demonstrated that they're prepared to take enforcement action. Some well-known case studies, again, focusing on airlines, investment funds, consumer brands. They're all showing the reputational consequences often extend well beyond just the financial penalties. For organizations selling into Europe, the practical message is simple. Robust evidence is becoming a global expectation rather than a uniquely European requirement. So we can expect much greater scrutiny in all industries and in all jurisdictions, not just in the big companies. When this comes into force, sure, they're always going to start with the big players like the airlines, but expect any claim to ultimately be questioned. Now, sometimes you can be telling the truth, but there can still be a regulatory risk if you don't have the context or sufficient qualification. So you could say a destination is sustainable or venue is carbon neutral, and this may be technically correct in some respects. But without explaining the scope, the methodology, providing the evidence, then these statements can easily become misleading. Compare that with claims that reference measurable improvements, recognized certification, or published methodologies. You can see what is going to be defendable and what is not. And small changes in wording often make a significant difference to credibility. So going back to our earlier recommendation, remember to be clear, specific, support and verify your claims. Like I say, I'm repeating this message throughout in the hopes that at least subliminally you'll remember it beyond this this webinar. So which claims deserve the greatest attention and what can you defend? So broad claims such as our destination is sustainable or our conference is green are very difficult to defend because they can mean different things to different audiences, as we've discussed. By contrast, statements supported by measurable data, recognized certification, or transparent methodologies are much easier to substantiate. So obviously, if you look on the right side of the screen, here we are qualifying statements with facts, figures. The objective here is not to make sustainability communication dull. It's simply to qualify what you're saying somewhere that people can access. So you can still say, we have a sustainable destination, as long as somewhere which is easily accessible with that statement is the clarification on how that destination was measured as sustainable, what data backs that up, what verification or certification exists that demonstrates this. So equally, there's growing attention on green hushing, and I think this is probably an opportune moment to mention this because green hushing, if you are not familiar with the term, is when organizations basically stop talking about their sustainability or environmental claims, or even remove them from their websites. And there have been a few organizations that have already got into trouble, a couple notable ones in generally they're oil companies or shale companies that are but there's been a couple in Canada that have already got into trouble for notably removing all statements and claims that were originally on their website. So expect in the long run that silence is not going to save you. People will be asking the questions, and you'll need to be able to defend them. And like I say, it's not just about having a boring statement. The goal is qualification, not silence. Now, certain categories of claims consistently present the highest risk, and evidence from regulators around the world shows that generic environmental language attracts the greatest scrutiny, particularly within very large corporates, multinational corporates. Claims around carbon neutrality, low impact, eco-friendly services, or sustainability leadership all require particularly robust evidence. Offset-led claims have also become a major focus because offsets cannot replace genuine emissions reductions. There's been a notable legal case in Germany, which was actually around licorice, because they basically said they were carbon neutral, which was based on the fact that they had offsets. So there's no longer the possibility to pay to pollute. So statements like eco-friendly experience, these are very high risk, and they are banned as a generic claim unless they're backed by specific evidence of recognized excellent environmental performance. Sustainable tourism operator is a statement that's very high risk as well. It requires definition, an evidence base, and independent verification against a recognized scheme. Carbon neutral holiday or carbon neutral meeting. This is a very critical risk, cannot be based on offsets alone, and it requires actual life cycle emissions reduction to net zero in absolute terms. Low impact. This term remains high risk. You must quantify and give evidence of the reduction and impact compared to what and measured how. So you need to explain the context and the method. Green certified. This remains a high risk if you don't reference a recognized and accredited scheme. There, in the past, out of those 230 schemes that the EU reviewed, some of these are self-certification, where sometimes they put a little icon like this, a little badge on their product, and it reassures the customer, makes them think it is environmentally friendly. Statements like, we care about the environment, or similar value statements remain medium to high risk. It can constitute a claim if it creates an environmental impression without any supporting evidence. So you can certainly see why there is a bit of a movement towards green hushing. It's getting to that position where many companies are feeling that it's safer to keep their mouths closed and not say anything rather than put their foot in it. Now, if you prioritize reviewing any claims after today's webinar, these are the ones that I would start with, meaning I would look at claims around generic environmental language, carbon neutrality, low impact, eco-friendly, and anything to do with offsetting. This is where you as an organization should start your journey to start reviewing any claims that you've made. And as we said earlier, and I think it's worth reminding here, anyone can challenge the green claim. And that opens you up to a lot of potential people who can communicate very quickly through social media and can challenge publicly any statement that is made. Now, I suppose with that, we really need to understand what are the consequences, because this then helps explain why this matters. Now, the consequences extend well beyond financial penalties, which can be up to 4% of annual turnover in the relevant country. In some jurisdictions, it could be even higher. The UK and Australia, it is the greatest of either fixed amounts, normally around 10 million, or 3 times the value of benefit derived, or 10% of annual global turnover, not just turnover within the country. So what this means is it's very important that you know the implications in the jurisdictions in which you operate. Regulators can require organizations to withdraw their claims, publish corrective statements, and in some circumstances, they may even face complete exclusion from procurement opportunities within those jurisdictions. Perhaps most importantly, unsupported claims can also damage your reputation and the buyer confidence at exactly the time organizations are trying to differentiate themselves. So good governance is therefore a commercial investment as much as a compliance exercise. So 6 mistakes then to avoid, and this is kind of reinforcing the points that we've already made, but across industries, we do see the same mistakes repeated. So organizations rely on broad sustainability language. They may overstate the significance of a single initiative to make it seem like the entire product or service is sustainable or green. They may depend too heavily on offsets or reference certification without explaining what that certification actually demonstrates. And remember, even colors, icons, and imagery can unintentionally broaden the impression created by a claim. So it's not only explicit, but it's also implicit, putting symbols, shapes, colors, and icons there to potentially mislead a consumer. So a simple internal review process can prevent most of these issues before content is published, which is why I asked at the very beginning why we did the poll to find out who had a formal process to review. And we saw that 70% of you did not. So having a simple internal process is a great place to start in order to protect yourself. So what does good evidence actually look like? And I think evidence I think of it very much as a pyramid. Communication sits at the bottom and credibility at the top. Claims sit at the bottom because they're easy to make, but they're very difficult to defend. This is what you say you do, the messaging statements and the promises you make. Above that, you've got policies. Policies demonstrate your governance and they show intent, and they drive consistency and help to reduce your risk. I often find we work with organizations all over the world, and we often find that many organizations have the best of intentions. They may be doing quite a few things, but they don't necessarily approach it in a strategic way, and they don't necessarily formalize their policies or their processes to do it. And this is a key step in this evidence pyramid. Above that, you have the data. And the data quantifies what you've done. It enables tracking. It builds transparency. And it leads to being able to show performance. And performance shows measurable outcomes over time. It shows progress against targets, and it supports comparison with benchmarks or with competitors. So some of the claims that you may make, comparative claims, will get a lot of scrutiny as well. So if you're saying that I'm better, I am more sustainable, I am greener than a competitor, these will be heavily scrutinized. I'm sure the competitor that you're comparing to will be the first to question and challenge as well. At the top sits verification, and importantly here, independent verification. This provides the strongest and most defensible foundation for communication. And this is why Booking.com have moved in the direction that they have. It was not in their interest to try to make a whole new certification when certification bodies and scheme owners out there exist where they can verify the claims and the level of sustainability that exists in your organization. So this is the most defensible foundation of communication. And the higher you move up this pyramid, the easier it becomes to support your sustainability story. Ultimately, credibility is going to influence a lot of commercial decisions. Even though I think that the biggest stories are going to be the organizations that get into legal hot water over the next 18 months and beyond. So what can you do? Increasingly, buyers will choose destinations and venues based on confidence rather than aspiration. If you have recognized certification, if you have reliable carbon or resource data, if you have supplier controls in place or event-specific evidence, this will all help to reduce uncertainty during procurement. Credibility is going to become a competitive advantage simply because it gives buyers confidence that sustainability commitments will actually be delivered. So that good evidence therefore supports not only compliance, but also a stronger commercial outcome. Oops. So we're nearing the end. So let's, before we get to some questions, let's just talk about 5 simple actions that you can do now that you're suitably panicking after joining during the school holidays, which we appreciate. You're now probably a little bit panicked and wondering, well, what am I supposed to be doing? So rather than trying to change everything overnight, I encourage organizations to begin with 5 practical actions. First and foremost, identify every sustainability claim across your websites. Simple, right? Across bid documents and across marketing material. Scrutinize all of the claims and statements that you have made and ask yourself whether or not you have defined it, whether you can defend it. Replace any broad environmental language with specific evidence-based statements. Review any references to certification, and also ensure you link each claim to an evidence owner and a source. At the end of the day, a lot of this comes back down to data management within an organization, data accessibility, and this can be quite disruptive and is disruptive to many businesses. As I mentioned earlier, check any and all claims on carbon or climate, as well as comparative and future claims first to ensure that they can be substantiated. So anything about carbon, as I mentioned before, comparative against how you perform compared to someone else, or future in terms of consider the entire life cycle of products, what happens to your waste, but also reductions or targets you've set in the future that you aim to achieve. Finally, as we mentioned earlier, introduce a simple internal review and an approval process so that sustainability, marketing, and operational teams are aligned before any claims are published. So these actions, they're practical, they're achievable, they'll significantly reduce both compliance and reputational risk. And once you've addressed the risks, I think that let's just remember that there's an opportunity here. it's very easy to view these changes as another compliance burden, but there's a big opportunity here. Organizations with robust governance and good quality evidence can communicate with greater confidence than ever before. Buyers increasingly value credibility over aspiration, and evidence-based communication helps build trust throughout the procurement process. Now, this is particularly complex in your industry with all of these different moving parts. Nobody really knowing who controls what. At the end of the day, whoever's getting billed, whoever's paying for something, uh, you're doing business and you've got an opportunity and a duty to question everything and every partner and every person that you do and every business that you work with. So this isn't about saying less about sustainability. It's about saying it better. In many cases, better communication will become a genuine competitive advantage, and the businesses that are being remaining quiet will be noticeable by their silence. Now, the timing of these changes is very important. The new rules apply from the 27th of September, but this is the start line, not the finish. National enforcement will continue to evolve. Member states are required to apply the directive, and then we'll start to see case law develop over time. What this means is we'll start to see how these regulations are applied and enforced, and then this will start creating pressure on other businesses to take action as well. Now, at the same time, online platforms, procurement teams, and AI search engines, look, they're already increasingly under scrutiny of sustainability claims. So, as you mentioned, advice here is to build that single evidence framework now that supports every market you operate in, rather than reacting individually as expectations start to change. So as we wrap up here then, if you remember nothing else from today's session, I hope you'll remember these 4 points. First, the Empowering Consumers Directive applies from the 27th of September. What is it now? So that's about 2 months away. Second, generic and offset-led claims carry the greatest regulatory risk. Third, sustainability communication is now shared across the event ecosystem, making common evidence and clear ownership essential. And finally, good governance does not restrict storytelling. If anything, it enables stronger, more credible storytelling. So sustainability itself hasn't fundamentally changed. Organizations are still reducing emissions, they're still improving resource efficiency and supporting communities exactly as they were before. What has changed is the standard expected when communicating those achievements. Buyers, regulators, and consumers will increasingly expect transparency, evidence, and consistency. So the organizations that invest in credible evidence today will be the organizations telling the strongest stories tomorrow. And ultimately, proof is becoming just as important as purpose. So if you'd like to continue building capability, we have a few resources that are available. At EarthCheck, we've developed a number of practical resources to help. This includes our ECGT. We have a practical storytelling guide. And also upcoming, we have a series of storytelling trainings that will run for 3 weeks on Wednesday, March the 9th, 16th, and 23rd of September, with an early bird registration now open. And also we have a sustainable events management system and calculator. So the QR codes are here and the information will be shared after the presentation. But the sustainable events management system is one for your industry that will help you to measure and collate that data so that you can demonstrate the claims that you are making. I'd also encourage you to review the European Commission's own guidance so you can see exactly how these principles are intended to be applied. Our aim is to help organizations communicate sustainability with confidence while avoiding greenwashing. So with that, exactly on 45 minutes, just want to thank you all for your time and your participation today. I hope this webinar has provided some practical ideas that you can apply within your own organization. And I'm very happy to answer any questions that may have come up during this session.
So, Steve, there are two questions. The first one is from Leuven Convention Bureau, and the question is: Our city has a clear path and ambition to be carbon neutral by 2050. Can we mention an ambition?
Excuse me. Yes, look, I think look, future ambitions and targets can be communicated, providing they're clearly presented as goals and not achievements, right? So as long as you're specific about the target, the time frame, how it's intended to get there, and ideally linking to credible transition plans, it's fine. Just avoid implying that you're already there or that you're on track. Make sure that you're very clear who owns this claim. If it's not you, but it's your city.
Perfect. Questions are coming in. Another one is: As a convention bureau, how do we handle our landing pages for venues, hotel, etc.? Do we write sustainability as a category and let them give us information, whether it's a certificate or vegan catering, etc.? Can we still call the category sustainability, or should we just allow certificates?
Okay. So let me see. Yeah. So look, sustainability, it can still remain as a navigation category, right? So the directive regulates claims. It's not going to affect like website menu labels. So the goal here is to ensure that any content within that section is accurate, specific, and supported by evidence rather than any broad or aspirational statements. So you can think of it as becoming an evidence hub. You can explain your initiatives, you can publish methodology, you can substantiate any environmental claims that you make. So it's not like the word sustainability is now blacklisted. You can still use the word.
Perfect. Then one other question: How strict should a certification be? This question comes from Yannick, who
I'm
is
sorry,
managing a
could you repeat that
certification.
again? I missed
Yeah.
that.
So Yannick is asking, how strict should a certification be? He is managing a certification called Green Business Events, and there's a checklist behind it with 60 criteria. However, the criteria are a practical compromise for the sector. They are not always very strict, and companies do also not have to fulfill all of these criteria and do not have to send proof. Where's the threshold of a certification not being strict enough?
I think that's a very good question. Yeah, a really good question. The challenge at the moment is there isn't any prescribed legal threshold. The key question is whether the certification is robust, transparent, and independently verified. So, look, the criteria, the weighting, the assessment processes, and what certification actually demonstrates should all be publicly available and clearly explained. Now, if an organization can pass without meeting significant sustainability requirements, I would say you should be very careful not to overstate what the certification represents. I think we're going to see quite a lot of disruption in this space because you know there are certification that you get that don't have third-party verification or audits, for example, something that EarthCheck has done from the very beginning, 35 years ago. So increasingly, what we expect to see in this space is that yes, we'll expect to see this ocean of labels to thin out. Just because the label exists before September the 27th doesn't mean that it's going to continue to exist. I think first and foremost, we'll see big organizations challenged, but then I expect to see labels challenged as well.
Perfect. Are there any other further questions? Yeah, Priscilla?
Yes, hello, good morning. Thank you for the good presentation. I have some questions as well. Basically, if you have quotes on your website, like mentioning like we won an award, so we are a leading destination in this and that, is that dangerous? What about quotes? Because yeah, that's set in the past by someone, and yeah.
Yeah. Well, look, potentially, yes. So the age of the quote doesn't remove the risk if it's still being used in your current marketing, right? So if you choose to publish the quote in your marketing, consumers may reasonably see it as an endorsed claim. So I think here you need to consider whether the statement is subjective opinion or an objective environmental claim that could require substantiation. So what this means is where necessary, add context and evidence or avoid using broad, unqualified statements like sustainable city. I mean, that's a very broad statement to make. So if you republish old awards, you're effectively re-endorsing that message. And therefore, it will still be a question as to whether or not it is accurate and supportable. In the same way that, if we look at look, asbestos was absolutely fine in the 80s in all the buildings, but it doesn't mean it's good today, right? So as we learn more, we have to, evolve, um, our statements as we go through it. So I would absolutely review older testimonials regularly. And I would recommend that you remove or qualify any environmental claims that can no longer meet the sort of substantiation threshold that we would expect today.
Okay.
Perfect. Any other further questions? Oh, Karen is also asking whether the green key continues to exist.
I guess we'll see. I think that's a good question. I don't think we have the answer. I expect that it will. There's nothing in the directive that would prevent green key from continuing to exist. I think will it have to change? I think schemes like Green Key are going to have to meet much higher standards for governance, transparency, and verification in order to be recognized under the new rules. And as far as I'm aware, they're already revising their criteria and certification process specifically to align with the Empowering Consumers Directive. So yeah, they're looking to adapt rather than disappear.
Okay, thank you so much, Steve. And thank you so much, Hey, as well. And just for all of you that are asking about the recording, yes, we're going to share the recording in link, Google Drive link. I'm going to send it in a few hours after this webinar. That link is going to contain a survey. We will appreciate if you can help us fill in that survey. Also, the recording and the PowerPoint presentation. And for us to continue learning, I would like to share the QR code. Please let me know that you can see it. You can scan this QR and you will be able to see the upcoming webinars that we're going to have in the following months. Also, if you have any question, you can contact me directly. Keep in mind that if you need ICCAWeBinar's credits, you can contact me and I'm going to be able to help you. I don't know, Steve or Hea, if you would like to say something else before we end this webinar.
I just want to thank everybody, and Steve, thank you for giving this presentation. I think it's been very helpful. And as Cindy said, for all the European members on the call, if you have further questions, please do reach out to me or Effie.
Last thought for me as well was again, thank you everybody for joining. Yeah, the presentation will be shared and there's QR codes in there, and we'll also be sharing with the team any other resources that we think may be helpful to you. Thank you.
Okay, then we wish you a good day and thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.